You can always have another wedding, Naomi. I only get one gender reveal for my first baby. That's what my sister Vanessa told me 6 weeks before I walked down the aisle in a glass house full of empty chairs. She said it casually, almost cheerfully, like she was choosing a brunch menu. Like my wedding day was some flexible little thing I could fold up and move out of her way. Like a promise made in public, deposits already paid, invitations already mailed, vows already written, meant less than a room full of pastel balloons and a cake waiting to be cut open. So she booked her gender reveal brunch on the same day as my wedding. Same day, same stretch of hours, different state, different city. Far enough apart that no one could honestly do both unless they had access to a helicopter and a functioning conscience. And one by one, my family followed her, my mother, my aunts, my cousins. Even my father, the man who had looked me in the face and promised he would walk me down the aisle, chose to stand beside my sister while pink or blue smoke exploded over somebody else's lawn. On my wedding day, there were 48 chairs arranged beneath soft October light in Beaufort, South Carolina. Only 8 people showed up. 362 messages showed up later, though. They came flooding in the morning after I posted one quiet photograph from Santorini. One photograph. No bragging. No explanation. No revenge speech. Just a white terrace, blue water, my husband's arms around me, and a caption that said exactly enough. That was when the same people who had vanished from my wedding suddenly remembered I existed. Before I go on, if this story hits somewhere tender in you, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if this kind of story genuinely means something to you, and tell me where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. My name is Naomi Carter. I'm 30 years old. And if you want to understand why those 362 messages came so late, I need to take you back 7 months before my wedding, to a spring brunch in Charleston, when my father looked at the man I loved and asked him when he planned to get a real job. In the Carter family, there was one rule no one ever said aloud, because rules like that work better when everyone pretends they don't exist. Everything revolved around Vanessa. My father, Edward Carter, spent 29 years in commercial lending at a regional bank. He was respected, predictable, polished in the way men get polished when they spend decades mistaking control for character. My mother, Lorraine, lived like she was curating a life for other people's approval. Candles in all the right places, monogrammed towels nobody was allowed to touch, dinner tables that looked ready for a magazine spread even when the conversation around them could have stripped paint. From the outside, we looked solid, elegant even. The kind of family people assume must be close because the Christmas cards always arrive on time. From the inside, the truth was much simpler. Vanessa was the center of gravity because Vanessa had married money. Her husband, Grant Hale, co-owned a boutique hotel development company based in Charlotte. For years, he had been the golden son-in-law. He paid for my parents' new roof after a storm. He covered random temporary shortfalls that somehow became permanent. He sent over $2,700 a month more than once when my parents needed a little help with flexibility. He got my mother into charity events she liked to talk about as though she'd been born to them. He bought access, comfort, and loyalty in one clean package. And in return, my family treated Vanessa like she was the sun itself. Vanessa hadn't held a real job in years. She called herself a consultant, which in her case mostly meant curating her own image and saying, "We're just slammed right now," in a tone that suggested she was one board meeting away from world domination. But because she lived well, dressed well, and married well, my family never questioned what she actually contributed. And in our house, appearance wasn't just currency, it was theology. Then there was me. I lived in Savannah, Georgia, in the ground floor of an old carriage house with crooked floors, paint on the sink, and windows that let in too much heat in August and too much draft in January. I worked as a botanical illustrator. Book covers, tea labels, seasonal packaging, the occasional editorial commission. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't come with health insurance or a company holiday party, but it was mine, and I loved it. I met Elias Rowan at an open studio night in Savannah 3 years ago. He was standing in front of one of his photographs, a long hallway in an abandoned theater, light pouring through a cracked door at the far end like mercy itself, and he was staring at it as though it still hadn't said everything he needed it to say. Elias is a fine art photographer. He shoots silence. That's the easiest way to explain it. Empty rooms, old stairwells, deserted sanctuaries, banquet tables after everyone has left, spaces where something important happened or failed to happen, and the walls still know it. People in the art world called his work haunting. My family called it gloomy. At that spring brunch in Charleston, my father carved into a roast and asked Elias, with a smile too smooth to be kind, "So, how long do you plan to keep photographing empty buildings before you do something more stable?" Grant laughed. Vanessa tilted her head and added, "At least Naomi found someone who understands her whole creative season." Creative season. Like we were both having a prolonged episode that adulthood would eventually fix. Elias said nothing. He never fought for dignity in rooms that had already decided not to offer it. He just reached under the table and rested his hand on my knee. That was the moment I should have understood something I kept resisting for years. Some people do not need more evidence, they need more benefit. Still, a month later, Elias proposed. It was late January, cold enough that the air near the marsh bit at our faces. We were walking near the water outside Savannah just before sunset, and he asked me in the gentlest voice I had ever heard from him. No grand setup, no hidden photographer, no violin rising from the bushes like a deranged woodland production. Just the man I loved, a silver ring with coordinates etched inside, and a question that felt more honest than anything I had ever been offered. I said yes before he even finished asking. And we planned a small wedding for October 18th in Beaufort, a glasshouse by the water, white flowers, candlelight, 48 chairs, good food, a short ceremony, nothing extravagant, just something warm and beautiful, and ours. When I called my parents with the date, my father paused just long enough to bruise the moment before saying, "I'll be there, sweetheart. I'll walk you down the aisle." I held on to that promise like it had weight. I had no idea how cheaply he'd give it away. Vanessa was strangely quiet at first. That should have worried me more than it did. She didn't criticize the venue. She didn't ask whether the flowers were too plain. She didn't make one of her polished little comments about how intimate weddings usually just meant underfunded. She texted me, "Happy for you," with a white heart, and then disappeared back into the carefully lit kingdom of her own life. For a few weeks, I let myself believe silence might be peace. Then my Aunt Denise called me one Thursday afternoon while I was painting seed pods for a holiday tea label. "Honey," she said, "have you figured out how you're doing both?" I remember standing very still, brush in hand, green pigment drying at the tip. "Doing both what?" A pause. "Vanessa's reveal and your wedding. Aren't they the same day?" That was how I found out. Vanessa had scheduled her gender reveal brunch in Charlotte on October 18th. It started at noon. My ceremony in Beaufort started at 4. On paper, it looked almost possible to anyone determined to lie to themselves. In reality, it was impossible. Not just because of the distance, but because the entire point was to make a choice. I called Vanessa immediately. She picked up on the fourth ring, too quickly cheerful. "Oh my God, Naomi, I was literally going to call you." "No, you weren't. What is this?" "It's just brunch," she said. Grant's mother had a date issue. The venue was booked out. The planner was holding that slot. And honestly, it spiraled. I assumed people could do both if they wanted. That was the kind of sentence Vanessa specialized in, one that sounded innocent until you looked directly at it. My wedding was not an afternoon coffee. Her event was not a 15-minute cupcake reveal. She knew exactly what she was doing. "You knew my date." "I know. But Naomi." And then she gave me the line, "I don't think I'll ever forget for as long as I live. You can always have another wedding. I only get one gender reveal for my first baby." My whole body went cold. She said it lightly. That was the worst part. Not like a confession, not like an attack, like a fact. I called my mother next. She sighed before I even finished explaining, and that sigh told me more than any sentence could have. "Sweetheart," she said, "Vanessa's emotional right now. She's pregnant. Maybe you could shift your wedding a couple of weeks?" A couple of weeks. Like venues reopened because your mother preferred another daughter's schedule. Like florists handed back deposits because family politics got inconvenient. Like vows were something you penciled in and moved around after brunch. "I'm not moving my wedding." Well, then maybe some people can split up. Some people. That was how my mother referred to the collapse of my side of the aisle. My father was worse, because he still wanted to be seen as good while doing nothing good at all. "Let me talk to your mother," he said first. Then, "I'm sure it will sort itself out." Then, "Don't make this uglier than it needs to be." As though the ugliness came from me noticing it, the full picture came from Sophie. Sophie Lynn had known me since college, and she possessed the rare and glorious personality trait of being allergic to nonsense. She also had a memory like a prosecution exhibit. She called me one night and said, "Sit down, your sister is running a campaign." Vanessa had been working the phones one by one. To my mother, "If you miss this, I'll always remember that you weren't there for my first baby." To various aunts, "Grant's side is coming in force. It'll be humiliating if our family looks thin." To cousins, "Naomi's thing is tiny. It won't matter." And to my father, in a message Sophie screenshotted from a family thread I'd muted years earlier, Vanessa had written, "Dad, Naomi always acts stronger than she is. She'll understand. She's used to being disappointed." I read that twice, then a third time. Used to being disappointed. It was astonishing how much truth can hide inside cruelty. Vanessa knew exactly which role I had been assigned in our family: the understanding one, the flexible one, the low-maintenance daughter who would absorb impact and then be criticized for bleeding in a visually inconvenient way. Sophie also pointed out what I had been reluctant to say aloud. Grant's money was part of this. As long as Grant was comfortable, my parents were comfortable. As long as Vanessa was pleased, the support flowed. Nobody had to threaten anything. The system spoke for itself. My parents were not just emotionally aligned with Vanessa, they were financially trained to stay near her. That night, I sent one final message to every relative invited to my wedding. It was polite, almost painfully so. Date, time, address, directions. Then one line: "I hope to see you there." No one replied, not one person. And that was the moment something in me stopped begging. Not loudly, not dramatically. It just went quiet. Like a door inside the house of my heart had closed and locked itself when I wasn't looking. Sophie drove in from Atlanta for the wedding. She told me over the phone, "I don't care if I have to crawl there on a rim and a prayer. And I'm coming." That sentence meant more to me than half the blessings I'd heard in church. October 18th arrived bright and brittle, the kind of southern autumn day that tricks you into thinking light is the same thing as warmth. I was in the bridal room at the glasshouse in Beaufort while Sophie fixed my hair. My dress hung from a brass hook by the window. My bouquet sat in a jar of water on the vanity. White lisianthus, olive branches, a few pale ranunculus. Simple, honest, beautiful. My phone rang. Dad. Sophie looked at me in the mirror and went still. I answered. His voice came through thin and tired, already apologizing for itself before it reached me. "Naomi. Honey. I don't know how to make this work." I said nothing. "Vanessa's event starts at noon, and then there's family lunch after. And by the time your mother and I got on the road, we wouldn't make Beaufort before the vows, before the aisle, before the promise mattered anymore." "You promised," I said. "I know. You promised you'd walk me down the aisle." A long silence. Then, because small cruelties often arrive dressed as reason, he said, "You and Elias will have other milestones, sweetheart. Anniversaries, holidays. This is Vanessa's first baby." I don't think a person forgets the sentence that finally breaks something in them. "This is my wedding day," I said. "There won't be another first one." His exhale trembled through the speaker. Don't make this harder than it already is. There it was. The Carter family prayer. Don't make your pain inconvenient. I hung up. Not because I was strong. Because I knew if I stayed on the line 1 second longer, I would start asking why I had never been enough to choose first. Sophie didn't say anything. She just took my phone, turned it face down, and finished pinning my veil. At 2:30, we arrived at the glasshouse. The late light filtered through the panes and laid soft gold across the floor. The water beyond the reeds looked silver. Candles had already been placed along the aisle. My florist had done a beautiful job. Everything looked like it had been waiting all day to be loved. There were 48 chairs. 40 of them were empty. 8 people had come. Sophie, 2 of Elias's photographer friends, 2 college friends of mine from Savannah, a husband and wife who owned the cafe where Elias and I spent half our winter mornings, Martin Halewood, our landlord, and my old high school art teacher, Mrs. Bellamy, who had driven 3 hours because she said no girl should have to look down an aisle and feel unwanted. I stood at the back entrance in my dress, bouquet in hand, and looked at all those empty seats. People talk about heartbreak like it's loud, like it crashes, like it announces itself. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it is very quiet. Sometimes it is just rows and rows of empty chairs arranged with care, each one holding the shape of someone who chose not to come. I was about to tell Sophie I could walk myself when I heard footsteps behind me, slow, measured, certain. I turned. Martin Halewood stood there in a charcoal suit I had never seen before. He was 72 years old with silver hair, beautiful posture, and the kind of face that looked even kinder when it was sad. For 3 years he had been our landlord in Savannah, charging us a rent so low it felt like a clerical error, bringing tomatoes down from his little garden in the summer and drifting into Elias's workspace to say things like, "Your shadows are doing half the emotional work, but the doorway is doing the rest." I had always known he had an eye. I just didn't yet know why. He offered me his arm. "Your father should be here," he said. "But since he is not, let someone who actually knows your worth have the honor." That was it. That was the sentence. Not dramatic. Not ornate. Just true enough to split me open. I took his arm, and Martin Halewood walked me down the aisle. All 8 people stood. Sophie already crying. Elias at the end of the aisle, his face trying and failing to stay composed. I don't remember every word of the ceremony. I remember Elias's voice shaking on my name. I remember the light slipping across the glass overhead. I remember how, in a room mostly filled with absence, the people who were there felt suddenly enormous. We got married. Not the wedding my family thought counted. Not the kind that would impress Vanessa's friends. Not the kind with enough bodies to hide who loved you and who didn't. But real. Deeply, stubbornly real. Afterward, we ate under string lights. There was seafood, bread, lemon cake, a playlist running through a portable speaker because I had long since given up pretending this day matched anyone's fantasy but mine. Sophie made a toast that nearly wrecked me. Mrs. Bellamy held my hands and said, "You were always the brave one, and I just wish you'd never had to practice so much." By the time Elias and I got back to Savannah that night, I made one mistake. I checked my phone. Nothing from my family. No congratulations. No thinking of you. No, I'm sorry. Not even a cowardly emoji sent from a moving car. Then I made the second mistake. I opened Vanessa's Instagram story. There she was in a cream maternity dress under an arch of balloons, one hand on her stomach, one hand linked through my mother's arm. My father was beside her in one photo, smiling with his whole face, the exact smile I had looked for at the end of my own aisle and never found. The caption said, "Couldn't imagine this day without family." I stared at that line until the words stopped meaning anything. Later that night, lying beside Elias in our little carriage house apartment, I told him he had deserved a real wedding. He turned toward me in the dark. "This was real," he said. "The fake version was the one they chose." I cried then. Not because I was fragile, Because I was exhausted from being reasonable in a family that used my grace as a storage unit for their failures. 8 days later, I sent one final message. Thank you for your silence. It told me everything your words never would. I won't be reaching out again for a while. My mother replied 2 days later with one line. Don't be dramatic. It was almost impressive how much cruelty she could compress into so few syllables. I muted everything and went back to work. Elias started photographing with a kind of focus I had never seen from him before, not because he was inspired by pain in the romantic, cinematic way people love to imagine artists are. No, he was furious. Quietly, precisely, productively furious. He began building a series around absence, empty banquet chairs, place settings untouched after an event. A greenhouse aisle where the symmetry only made the emptiness feel crueler. A name card on a reception table with no glass lifted, no napkin unfolded, no one sitting there to claim it. He called the series Reserved. Martin came downstairs one afternoon, stood in front of the greenhouse image for a long time, and said, "Now you've finally stopped photographing rooms and started photographing betrayal." A week later, he invited us upstairs for coffee. He had laid out a cardboard box on his dining table. Inside were exhibition catalogs, old gallery cards, articles clipped from magazines, black and white photographs of artists at openings in New York. The name on the covers made me sit down harder than I intended. Halewood House? I had heard of it. Any artist in our orbit had. A serious gallery, prestigious, historic, quietly influential. Martin poured coffee and said, with maddening calm, "I owned it for 20 years. I stared at him. "You never told us?" "You never asked," he said, then softened. "And I didn't want Elias performing for my approval. I wanted to know whether the work would survive being ignored first." It had. Then he told us the rest. Months earlier, before the wedding, before the reveal disaster, before any of it, he had sent samples of Elias's work to Helena Voss, a collector and patron with a reputation for spotting serious photographic voices before the market caught up. Helena had bought one piece immediately, $71,000. I laughed when he said the number. Not because it was funny, because my brain rejected it on contact. Elias just lowered his eyes, which was when I understood he had known. "I was going to tell you after the wedding," he said. I didn't want our day turning into a money story. Martin slid another document toward us. Helena wanted more. A formal commission. 12 works. $480,000 over 15 months. Transportation, insurance, exhibition rights, all carefully spelled out. Alongside it came an offer for a solo show in Atlanta. It was real. Not dream real. Paper real. I read every page twice. I don't know what stunned me more, the numbers or the timing. My family had dismissed Elias as unstable while the ground beneath our lives had already begun to change. Helena called a few days later and spoke to Elias like he was someone whose time mattered. By the end of the conversation, she had invited us to stay at a property she maintained on Santorini. Part honeymoon, part retreat, part gift. I hesitated. Not because I thought we didn't deserve it, because some old stupid reflex in me still flinched when life offered more than my family thought I had earned. Elias took my hand under the table. Martin said, "Go. Enough shrinking." So we did. Around that same time, I began hearing whispers that Grant's company had hit trouble. Delays, financing issues, a project in Asheville that had stalled, another in Charlotte losing investors. I didn't chase details, but I noticed something else. My mother suddenly started calling more often, not to apologize, just to feel around the edges of access. I'm like a thief, testing a window. I kept my responses polite and brief. Then Elias and I flew to Santorini. You know what struck me most about that first evening? It wasn't luxury. It was peace. The villa sat above the caldera in white silence, the sea below like a sheet of hammered blue glass. The terrace smelled like salt and lemon leaves. Nobody there looked at Elias and saw lack. Nobody asked me to justify loving a creative life. The conversations at dinner were about light, form, memory, architecture, longing. The kind of things my family had always treated like decorative hobbies until money attached itself to them. On the last evening, as sunset turned the white walls honey gold, I took one picture. I stood at the terrace railing in a pale dress I had bought in a little shop earlier that week. Elias stood behind me, his chin against my temple. On the table beside us was a glass of wine and the corner of a preview booklet from his upcoming Atlanta exhibition. My caption was simple: Late honeymoon, grateful for the ones who showed up. I posted it and went to bed. When I woke up the next morning, my phone looked deranged. 362 notifications, missed calls, text messages, cousins, aunts, my mother, my father, Vanessa, Grant. People who had not found the energy to text me on my wedding day had become astonishingly awake once there was Mediterranean light and visible status in the frame. My father had sent 13 texts. Whose place is that? Why didn't you tell me? Naomi, call me. Honey, please answer your father. My mother's messages were worse in their own way. Oh my goodness, sweetheart, is this Santorini? I'm so happy for you. We need to celebrate when you get back. Celebrate. The word had the emotional intelligence of a rake to the face. Vanessa's messages moved fast from shock to calculation. Wait, what? Since when is Elias doing this well? We should talk. Grant sent one message, which somehow annoyed me more than everyone else combined. Would love to connect with Elias when you're back. I may know some hospitality clients who'd appreciate his eye. That was the moment I laughed. Really laughed. The kind of laugh that only arrives when hypocrisy grows so large it becomes structurally absurd. I didn't answer anyone. Not that hour. Not that day. The next evening, sitting outside with the sea below us and the sky going mauve, I opened the family group chat for the first time in weeks and wrote one message. Thank you for reaching out. Elias and I are well. Since many of you are asking, Elias signed a major photographic commission before our wedding, and his upcoming exhibition in Atlanta is already underway. The Santorini trip was a gift from his patron. I also need to say this clearly. None of that changes what happened on October 18th. Dad promised to walk me down the aisle and did not come. Mom chose Vanessa's event over my wedding. Vanessa scheduled her reveal on my wedding day deliberately. I am not interested in pretending that did not hurt. I need space. When I am ready to speak individually, I will reach out. I sent it. Then I put my phone away again. For hours, nothing happened. I imagined them reading it in kitchens and cars and polished dining rooms, each person discovering the same unpleasant little creature at the center of the story: consequence. When we returned from Greece, the Atlanta exhibition announcement went public. Reserved. Photographs by Elias Rowan. A regional arts magazine ran a preview. Then a bigger publication picked it up. Then one Sunday feature, the kind people forward to each other with the subject line, "Have you seen this?" included the image that changed everything. The title was October 18th, 4:07 p.m. It showed the glasshouse aisle in Beaufort. Rows of white chairs. Late light through the panes. 8 seats occupied. 40 empty. It was devastating. The listed price was $110,000, sold before opening night. At the exhibition, a reporter asked Elias whether the image was based on a real event. Yes, he said. It was our wedding. That was all. No monologue. No family takedown. No melodrama. Just the truth. Clean enough to cut. After that, people started asking Vanessa questions she could no longer charm her way around. Friends who had liked her reveal photos now knew what date it had happened on. People who had never met me understood the math of those empty chairs faster than my own relatives ever had. My father saw the article. My mother later told me he sat at the kitchen island with his reading glasses on and didn't speak for nearly an hour. Good, I thought. Let silence teach him something for once. Before I go further, let me pause here for a second. If you've ever had the kind of family that only recognizes your worth once strangers do, tell me in the comments. I read more of them than you probably think, and those stories always remind me how many people have had to build belonging from scratch. The fallout came in layers. Grant called Elias first, all charm and business voice, congratulating him and casually mentioning possible collaborations. Elias, in a tone so polite it was practically surgical, told him all commission requests now went through the gallery. Vanessa was furious, but not with herself, with exposure, with the fact that the story had stopped belonging to her. Then Grant's situation worsened. One hotel project froze, another financing deal collapsed. Investors pulled back. The golden son-in-law glow flickered. Within weeks, the support he'd been giving my parents thinned and then stopped. The comfortable arrangement everyone had organized their morality around suddenly looked a lot less permanent. That was when my father called. His voice sounded older, smaller. "Naomi," he said, "your mother and I, things are tight right now." There it was. Not even hidden well. I let the silence sit. Then I said, very calmly, "Before we talk about money, we need to talk about my wedding." He inhaled sharply like he hadn't expected the dead to answer back. "You told me you would walk me down the aisle. You broke that promise. You let a 72-year-old man who owed me nothing do what my own father would not. I need you to understand something clearly. I am not your contingency plan. I'm your daughter." He didn't speak for so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Then quietly, "You're right. Not a full apology. Not even close. But the first honest sentence he had given me in months." Vanessa called 2 days later. She started with softness. "I miss you." I said nothing. Then she moved to the real subject. The way people like Vanessa always do once sentiment has done its little warm-up stretch. "Mom and Dad are stressed. Grant's had some setbacks. You and Elias are doing amazing now. Can't we move forward?" Move forward. What a lovely phrase people use when they want to cross a bridge they burned from your side. "You scheduled your reveal on my wedding day," I said. "On purpose." "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." She tried to blame hormones, pressure, fear, pregnancy, expectations, everything except the one thing that mattered: choice. Finally, I said, "You didn't just want your own day, you wanted mine too." The silence on the line changed shape, became heavier, less defensive. Then she hung up. 8 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of a house Elias and I had bought together just outside Savannah. Not a mansion. Not one of Grant's polished hotel lobby fantasies. A white cottage with blue shutters, a deep porch, a room upstairs with perfect morning light for my illustration work, and a converted back space Elias had turned into his studio and print room. There were rosemary bushes near the steps, 3 chipped mugs on the windowsill, a long table where people actually sat when they said they would. We had paid for the house ourselves. No family rescue, no strings, no performance. Helena had commissioned more work. The Atlanta show had gone better than anyone predicted. My own career had shifted too. A publisher saw some of my botanical illustrations through a gallery contact and offered me a book project of my own. It turns out, life gets interesting once you stop spending all your energy auditioning for love. Martin came for dinner every Sunday. He drove up from Savannah in his old sedan with a loaf of bread or a bottle of wine and sat at our table like he had always belonged there. In every way that mattered, he had. The man who wasn't family had shown up more faithfully than the people who were supposed to be. One Tuesday afternoon in June, my father came to the house alone. No phone call first. No warning. He stood on the porch in khakis and a blue button-down, holding something wrapped in brown paper under one arm. He looked older than I remembered, but more than that, he looked stripped of something. Pride, maybe, or the illusion that time automatically excuses cowardice. "I didn't come to ask for anything," he said. I opened the screen door but did not step aside yet. I came to say I was wrong. Not elegant, not polished, just blunt. He looked past me into the house and then back at my face. I sat under a tent in Charlotte eating catered brunch while my daughter got married with 8 guests and a stranger walking her down the aisle. I will regret that until the day I die. There are some sentences that do not fix anything, but they do finally stop the lying. I nodded once and let him in. We sat at the kitchen table. Elias made coffee. My father unwrapped what he had brought. Inside was an old certificate from a statewide youth art competition I had won at 14. My name was written across the top in faded ink. I had forgotten it existed. He said he found it in a box in the attic. It should have been framed years ago, he said. I looked at the paper for a long time. Then I put it on the table between us. Forgiveness is not a switch. It's not a glittery movie moment where one well-timed speech turns betrayal into closure and everybody hugs in flattering light. Forgiveness, when it comes at all, is a bridge you build plank by plank, and some people arrive with their hands empty after having burned the first half. Still, I poured him coffee. That was all I had to give that day. A week later, Vanessa sent me a letter. An actual letter. Blue stationery. Her handwriting, still careful and self-conscious in places where the truth had to pass through it. Most of it was what I expected. Explanations, half apologies, detours. But in the middle of the third page was the line that mattered. I scheduled the reveal on your wedding day because I couldn't stand the idea of everyone looking at you for once. I read that sentence 4 times. And then I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer. Not because I accepted it fully. Not because everything was healed. Because some truths deserve to be kept where you can reach them without letting them run your life. My mother calls now too. Not every day. Not with performance. Once a week. Usually. She asks about work. About the garden. About whether Elias is traveling again for a shoot. She never asks for money. I consider that progress in the same way a person considers a window no longer broken progress. It's not the same as beauty, but it is better than shards. Vanessa and Grant downsized. Grant took a quieter position with another development group. Vanessa, for the first time in a long time, got a real job coordinating fundraising events for a nonprofit. I heard through my mother that she's actually good at it. Life is funny like that. Sometimes people become useful only after the theater of being admired collapses around them. And me? These days I stand on my back porch in the evening and listen for the sounds that belong to the life I chose. Elias moving around in the studio, the scrape of a chair on the kitchen floor, the kettle beginning to hum, Martin's car in the driveway on Sunday, the rosemary catching light just before dusk. Small things. Real things. The kind that do not photograph nearly as well as yachts or terraces or coastal sunsets, and yet mean infinitely more. 48 chairs, 8 people, 362 messages that came too late. In the end, those numbers aren't really the point. The point is this. For years, I thought love meant enduring imbalance with grace. I thought being the good daughter meant making myself softer, quieter, easier to leave. I thought self-respect was something you earned after enough people finally saw your value. I was wrong. Self-respect begins the moment you stop negotiating with people who benefit from your hunger for their approval. And family? Family is not always the people who share your last name, your blood, your old photographs, your holiday table. Sometimes family is the friend who drives across states because missing your wedding is unthinkable. Sometimes it is the teacher who refuses to let your emptiness go unwitnessed. Sometimes it is the old man upstairs who sees your worth before your own father does and offers you his arm when the aisle opens and no one else comes. I spent too many years counting the people who left. Now I count the ones who stayed. And that has made all the difference. If this story stayed with you, tell me one thing in the comments. Would you have answered those 362 messages, or would you have left the phone face down a little longer? And if you've ever been the one looking down a row of empty chairs wondering who your real people are, I hope this reminds you of something important. The people who choose you without an audience are the ones worth building a life around, and sometimes the quietest revenge is not revenge at all. It's peace.